So I want to shift and instead focus on this idea of, okay, what is re-enchantment? In disenchantment, we've lost love and reverence and awe and wonder and transcendence. We've lost a sense of communion with God and with one another and with the cosmos and the natural world around us. We have this feeling of being out of touch with meaning and purpose and value. And so now in the modern world, if you want to have a meaningful life, you have to go out and create your own meaning, because there's no meaning to be found out there in the world.
Yeah.
So you just got to make something up.
Right. I mean, which like the same thing is happening in Christianity again. Like, you've got to find your own calling.
Mm-hmm.
You've got to, you got to step up and do this thing. And like the church like provides no framework for Christians.
Yeah.
So we're asking, how do you re-enchant the world?
Well,
Right.
yeah, I mean, I'm just starting off with this idea of what is re-enchantment, just trying, before we get to any how-to, like what is meant.
You're right.
And basically, like after disenchantment has drained the world of all those things of value, then re-enchantment. I mean, I'm just trying to define it. Re-enchantment is how do we fill the world again with all these good things and things of the spirit that used to be present and are no longer there.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think a good place to start would be with the tooth fairy.
Yeah.
Yeah, in Santa Claus.
Or a cookie jar that the cookies only come out by themselves and you never stick your hand in.
Is this going to be a mechanical intervention of some kind?
No, so like what
You're murdering to dissect, John. You're not supposed to ask that question.
Okay.
But
So-
you don't like I think going with Aaron's first proposition, though, I think the answer is that we should teach children the Tooth Fairy and Santa Claus.
Okay, no, I mean, that is part of the discussion, really, because when I said at the beginning of the video that people that are talking about re-enchantment, it seems like they don't exactly know how to express what they're saying. To me, I listened to some of these people, and it sounds like they're saying, let's just start believing in the Tooth Fairy again. Or to think like, you know what I really want? People used to be able to go fishing and catch a magic fish.
Yeah, I want to catch a magic fish. Well, so the reason I bring up the Tooth Fairy and Santa Claus is like what I see with Santa Claus is that like parents have like this latent desire to see the wonderment that children possess survive.
Yeah,
And
right.
like Santa Claus is a way that like that.
Well, that's with fairy tales in general.
Yeah.
Tolkien has this essay on fairy stories, and he wrote that like people were taking this great Victorian furniture and they were just putting it in the baby's room. Like these beautiful wood carvings and all this stuff, and they didn't want it anymore. It wasn't fashionable anymore, but they also didn't want to get rid of it, so they put it in the baby's room.
Right.
And he said that's what we did with fairy tales as well. We knew that these were actually good things, and we didn't want to get rid of them, but we also didn't really want them around, so we just pushed them into the kids' room.
Right.
So fairy tales today are for children, but they were never for children in the past.
Well, I mean, kind of, because like they are still stories that you're primarily telling to children, but it's like.
Well, but I mean,
But you're
for that
also
matter,
engaging.
you're primarily telling the story of Noah's Ark and David and
Yeah,
Goliath.
right.
But those are not children's stories.
Right.
But
They're
again,
not.
there's this sense of like we can just get rid of these things and not have these anymore.
Right.
But no, we'll keep them around for the sake of the kids because we want to see that wonder, like you're saying with Santa Claus.
Yeah, so it's like it's very easy for us to be critical of the Santa Claus myth, and there are some problems with it, and especially the way it's done in modern society. Like there's some issues with it, so I don't think any of us are advocating for teaching your children that Santa Claus is real. But the criticisms that people tend to have of it are kind of missing the mark at the same time. So like, there is an impulse behind this, I guess, this cultural myth that's not parents are lying to their children and this is an evil thing that they're doing. They're after something that's true and good, which is enchantment, which is, like children have an understanding of the world that like there's more to the world than what you see.
Yeah.
And parents, you know,
You can see that when your kids are kids.
yeah, and like you can still engage with that through your children, even if you
Yeah,
yourself have completely lost touch with it.
Mhm.
So like that's what I see is going on there. And so that means my primary criticism of Santa Claus then is that like you're living vicariously through your children.
Yeah,
It's like
right,
you're using
right.
your children for yourself,
Mhm.
basically. Like that's kind of, I don't know if that's fair, but that's how it appears
Right.
to me.
Well, yeah, I indicated earlier, like part of the Enlightenment worldview, in embracing rationality, then you punish and you try to wipe out everything that's not rational. And so, you know, that kind of wonder or wonderment that the child experiences, that the parent can't experience. Well, part of the reason the parent can't experience it is because the parent has devoted his life to rooting that out of his personality, like not allowing that part of his mind to exist and to thrive.
Yeah. Well, so like when this rationalism is taking over in the West in the late Middle Ages, there's another interesting phenomenon that pops up along with it, which is carnival.
Mm-hmm.
So carnival is a late medieval thing in the West. Like from all the research that I've looked into, like you can't really trace it back much further than the very end of the Middle Ages.
Okay.
But that makes a lot of sense because carnival is like all of these things that you're shoving down
Mhm.
with your rationalism.
Right.
They're going to come out somewhere.
Right.
And carnival is the moment that happens.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, especially like it makes sense that would happen before Lent when people are going to like, especially if Lent for you has turned into this performance, like go through the fast and do all the things with Lent in some kind of mechanistic way that this like gets you, I don't know, gets you points.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Which is kind of like what it is in the mind of a lot of medieval people, even if that's not necessarily what the church is officially teaching.
Yeah, I think every time you say get you points, then in my mind I think of like just check the box.
Yeah, right.
You know, even if you don't get any points, like you're supposed to do this, you did it.
Yeah,
Good for
right.
you.
And so like this is kind of the problem that exists in the late Middle Ages with a lot of people that, you know, like Martin Luther's responding to. Even though like, you know, indulgences was never actually a teaching of the church. It was actually rejected
Mhm.
by the Vatican well before Martin Luther, but people were doing it anyway.
Yeah.
Like this kind of thing, there's this problem that exists sort of in the institutions, but more in the culture. And so like it makes sense carnival appears because of that, because it's like all of these suppressed aspects of your human nature just like they got to go somewhere.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You know, you're talking, John, a little bit ago, you mentioned the idea of, or David also talked about this too, but the idea that parents are trying to live through their children, you know, the you could almost say the imaginative side of things or the
Mhm.
enchanted side of things. My late grandfather comes to mind because he was very much a man who would ask what a lot of people would term in modern thinking silly questions about things.
Yeah.
And he would never try to answer them. He would always just say these questions and laugh and listen at people's answers, and you just say, I wonder what this is like, or that, you know.
Right.
And he was often criticized as being childish sometimes.
Yeah.
But he was a rarity in his time of someone who still had some of that enchantment with them and didn't let go of it.
Yeah.
So is that what we're saying then for re-enchantment, is that we need to be more childish?
Well, I mean, I wouldn't say so, but I would say we need to be more like the kind of thing that rational people have condemned as being childish.
Yeah.
Well, like
Right.
there's something very human that we've said no to, but we have allowed it to exist in children. And so in that sense, we've classified it as childish.
Right.
And in that sense, yeah, be more childish. But really, I think it's a matter of be more human.
Yeah.
So,
Before you go on with that, like to connect back to what I was saying about, you know, carnival connected with disenchantment, there is a modern equivalent of that, which is, you know, people today are even more hyper rational than they were in the late Middle Ages,
Mhm.
and more mechanistic and performative about things than they were then. And so what we have today is like these like incredible obsessions, with something like Star Wars or Harry Potter or video games. Because it's like these people will have this hyper rationalistic atheistic worldview, but then just get like super into these esoteric mythological things, because they can compartmentalize it. They can take that part of themselves and go somewhere with it.
Yeah.
So it's like I can switch.
Yeah.
And so that's why
it's like there's even a pleasure that is like, this isn't part of my normal life. I'm not really like this, but I'm allowed to indulge in it here. But I think when you mention that, then I think also of like some of the what a healthy person would call disturbing music is the same way. Like you meet these people who are like really straight-laced business people,
right.
And then they tell you about the music they listen to. It's like, what?
It's like, what?
Yeah, this is not compatible with your public persona. So what's going on here? But there's something that you're suppressing, and you're allowing it to come out in this one aspect of life because it's not allowed to come out in the other aspect of life.
Right, and then like you have like cosplayers who just like basically fractured themselves off into two completely different people. It's like I can put on a costume and be the person who lives in this enchanted world.
Yeah.
And then I can take the costume off and be.
And I can live in the real world.
Yeah, live in the real world, which is less real than the pretend world that they live in.
Yeah, right.
So
right.
A little bit ago, I think it was John that you said is the answer that we be more childish or whatever. But if you ask a 5-year-old child, why do you eat 3 meals a day and why do you need 3 meals a day to survive? A 5-year-old child is maybe not even going to say, I don't know, and then they're going to dance off and play and have fun and enjoy life. That's what we need more of as adults is, why do we do these, or why do we need this, or why do we need that? I don't know. I can't explain that to you, but I do, and go off on my merry way.
There's the tendency is if there's something that you don't know the reason for, then rebel against it.
Yeah, right. I heard a priest saying the other day. I was listening to his talk, a talk he was giving on a certain subject, and he was talking about understanding things and how we understand things, and he said even I as a priest, if I have a parishioner come up to me and say, what does this passage of scripture mean? He said, and if I don't know what it means, I will tell them I don't know.
The only caveat I would put on that is, if we're talking about our religion, our Christian faith, the understanding has to exist somewhere in the church. I mean,
well, yes, it does.
To a certain degree, like there always has to be a place for mystery, and you shouldn't have like systematic theology that's spelled everything out. But as far as let's say, why do we take communion or the Eucharist? It's like you yourself might not understand that. But if it just becomes a matter of all anybody knows is, well, this is just what we do, and so we do it. Like, that's probably not a healthy dynamic.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah,
and then that's, but that's the idea, though, is that, I guess the way you could put it is, you have to be okay with saying, I don't understand this, and keep going.
Right.
Like, that's the problem with the way the world, that's the problem with the way the world is now, is people believe that if they don't, or they can't say what something means, or explain it, or do anything, they don't see a way forward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I guess to tie this into enchantment, the way this makes sense is that the world exists as a hierarchy, which is, the disenchanted modern world does not see it that way. It just fractures everything off into its own little category, and every person is his own person. And like the ascension of the individual outside of hierarchy, I'm my own man. And so that means it's important for me to personally understand everything I'm doing. which goes back to something we said at the beginning, that understanding is opposed to faith.
Yeah, yeah,
But if you understand yourself as existing within a hierarchy,
yeah,
then that's okay. It's okay that I don't understand things. And it's even okay that none of the men, I might be in an entire organization where I want the answer to something and I can't find it from somebody. And that just seems really jarring to our rationalistic mind, but that's okay if you understand, well, Christ is in charge and he understands.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And he'll give us that understanding as we need it. So that's something I think you're going to have that understanding with an enchanted worldview, because you're going to increasingly understand Christ as actually being present in whatever it is that you're doing.
yeah. I was kind of having the same thought, although I was a little surprised you're bringing in of hierarchy, and then as you explained, I thought, oh yeah, that's exactly what I had in mind. It's like you don't have to understand, because you can have faith in
Right.
authority,
Mhm.
and you can have a kind of faith in the tradition, even if you don't understand all the details. And the only situation where you would have to understand everything is if you're the highest law in the land. Like if you're the king and if you're the god, then you have to know everything.
Right.
But if you're willing to not be the king and not be the god, then you can be in uncertainty, and that's okay.
Which is why it's really important. So people are going to push back a little bit against this idea of faith and tradition. But what you said there is the key, is that the king has to know everything. And that's why it's very important that the king is Christ,
Mhm.
and not me or you or my bishop or whoever it would be.
Right.
Like it's Christ. And then I can understand the reason I can have faith in tradition is I'm not actually having faith in the tradition in and of itself, but I'm having faith in Christ operating through the tradition, or the Holy Spirit operating through the tradition, which, allows you, you're not venerating and reverencing and worshiping the tradition. You're not submitting to the tradition. You're submitting to Christ. And when your tradition becomes such that it's demanding that you submit to it, then it's antichrist. And that happens sometimes in the church. The tradition kind of kicks Christ out and is like, no, follow me, bend the knee to me. And then it's outside of its hierarchy, and it's not good. And it needs to be brought back in. And I think that's part of this whole re-enchantment discussion, is bringing everything back into its proper relationship with Christ,
Mhm.
and with
Yeah.
everything else.
Mhm.